The Lakota warrior asked, "Why are you crying for me?" Her tearful reply changed his heart forever. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the wide, open plains. Tasunk, a Lakota warrior, walked steadily along a narrow dirt path that led to his village. He was a man of strong build, with broad shoulders and eyes that had seen both the beauty and the cruelty of life. The wind whispered softly through the tall grass, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers and the earthy aroma of the plains. For Tasunk, every step reminded him of the many journeys he had taken, the battles he had fought, and the friends he had lost along the way. His heart was heavy with memories, yet his spirit carried a quiet strength that came from years of survival and courage. As he approached the river that cut through the landscape like a silver ribbon, he noticed a lone figure sitting on a flat rock near the water's edge. It was a young woman, small and delicate, yet her presence seemed to hold a certain power. Her dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders, catching the sunlight in soft waves, and her eyes were fixed on the flowing water. But it was the tears rolling down her cheeks that drew Tasunk closer. They glistened like tiny crystals, falling silently onto the sand and disappearing into the river's gentle current. Tasunk paused for a moment, unsure if he should speak. Warriors were often taught to be cautious, to read the land and the people around them. Yet something about this woman stirred a curiosity he could not ignore. He stepped closer, letting his shadow fall across the riverbank, and spoke softly, almost gently, so as not to startle her. "Why are you crying for me?" His voice was steady, but it carried a note of genuine concern. The woman looked up, startled at first, her eyes wide and shimmering. There was no fear in her gaze, only a deep sadness that seemed to mirror his own unspoken pain. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, hesitating before speaking. I heard your name," she said quietly, her voice almost blending with the rustle of the wind. "I heard what you have done for your people, and I felt your pain. I wanted to see you, to understand why someone so brave carries such sorrow." Tasunk studied her carefully. It was rare that someone approached him not with anger or judgment, but with a quiet, open heart. Most people feared the warrior's reputation, the stories of battles he had fought and victories he had won. But this woman, her tears were not of fear or hatred. They were of empathy, a strange and powerful emotion that he had almost forgotten existed. The river flowed between them, steady and unchanging, as if it were a witness to their meeting. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Tasunk felt a strange sense of calm, as though the world had slowed down just for this moment. He did not move closer, but he did not step back either. There was a silence, not awkward but full of meaning, as if words were not the only way to communicate. Finally, the woman spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "I cry not because of what you have done to others, but because of what you have endured yourself. I see the weight on your shoulders, the nights when you cannot sleep, the memories that haunt you. I cry for the man who fights for others but forgets to care for his own heart." Tasunk felt a lump in his throat. Few people ever saw him in this way. Even his closest friends had not understood the depth of his struggles. He had always believed that a warrior's strength was shown through courage in battle, through victories and survival. But here, by this quiet river, with this young woman's tears shining in the fading sunlight, he felt the walls around his heart begin to tremble. She continued, speaking with a softness that seemed to wrap around him like a warm blanket. "You think your pain is yours alone, but it touches everyone around you. You carry it in silence, believing it protects others. But sometimes, sharing it, letting someone see it, it can be a gift, not a weakness." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Tasunk could not ignore. He wanted to speak, to tell her that no one could understand, that his burdens were too heavy for another to bear. Yet when he opened his mouth, no words came. Instead, he lowered his gaze to the flowing river, watching the sunlight dance on the water, reflecting the tears that had fallen before. For the first time in many years, Tasunk allowed himself to feel the fullness of his own emotions. He did not try to hide them. He did not try to be the unshakable warrior the world expected him to be. Instead, he simply stood there, listening to the wind, to the river, and to the gentle voice of a woman who had seen beyond his armor. As the evening light softened, the woman's presence remained a quiet, steady comfort. She did not ask for anything in return, did not demand explanations or stories of battle. She only sat there, letting her tears fall, letting him see that sorrow could be shared and understood. It was a small gesture, yet for Tasunk it was powerful beyond measure. When the first stars began to appear in the sky, he finally spoke, his voice low but steady. I have seen much and I have carried it alone for a long time. Yet your tears they do not accuse. They do not judge, they see me. The woman nodded, a faint smile breaking through her sadness. Because seeing is the first step to healing, she whispered. Tasunk remained by the river long after she had gone, reflecting on her words, on her presence, and on the strange comfort that had come from her tears. That evening, for the first time in a long time, he felt something he had thought impossible: hope. Not the hope of battle or victory, but the hope of understanding, of connection, and of the possibility that even a warrior's heart could be touched, healed, and changed. And so, as the night descended upon the plains and the stars shimmered above, Tasunk began to understand that courage was not only in the strength of the body or the victories of the battlefield. True courage could also be in the willingness to feel, to accept, and to allow another to touch the deepest parts of one's soul. Ahioka sat quietly by the river for a long time, watching Tasunk walk back toward the village but remain nearby. Her hands rested lightly on her lap, fingers brushing the soft grass as if trying to connect with the earth beneath her. She could feel the weight of his presence, a mixture of strength and sorrow that seemed to linger even when he was silent. She had never seen a warrior like him before, someone whose courage in battle was matched by the deep heaviness of his heart. As the river whispered along its path, carrying fallen leaves and sunlight reflections downstream, Ahioka remembered the reason she had come to this place in the first time. Her brother, Wea, had been part of a small group sent to patrol the northern plains. They had faced a sudden skirmish with rival hunters, and despite their bravery, many had been injured. Wea had not returned. She had searched and waited for news for days, and finally she had learned that he had been caught in the fight led by the very warrior now standing quietly nearby. Ahioka's heart ached with grief, yet strangely, she felt no anger toward the warrior. She had heard of Tasunk not just as a fighter, but as a man who carried responsibility for every life lost and every battle fought. Something inside her told her that he, too, felt the pain of those he could not save. She believed that sorrow could create understanding, that true courage was sometimes shown through empathy rather than action. She rose from the rock and began to speak, her voice soft but filled with honesty. "Tasunk," she said, and he turned slightly, eyes meeting hers with cautious curiosity. "I cried because I thought perhaps someone should see you, should understand the burden you carry. People talk of your battles, of your bravery, but few understand the cost that comes with it. I see it, and I wanted to tell you that it matters, even if no one else says so." Tasunk's brow furrowed slightly. He had spent years in silence, believing that his pain was private and that others did not need to bear the weight of his experiences. But her words, gentle and sincere, felt like a small crack in the walls he had built around himself. For the first time, he wondered if perhaps someone could see not only the warrior, but also the man behind the armor. Ahioka continued, her voice trembling slightly as emotion welled within her. "My brother Wea, he was brave. He fought with honor and kindness in his heart, and yet he is gone. I have cried for him many times, but I also cry for you, because I have heard the stories of your strength and the sacrifices you have made. I cry not to accuse, but to share in the sorrow you must carry alone." Tasunk took a step closer, his hands resting loosely at his sides. Her words struck him in a way that nothing else had in years. He had faced countless enemies, had survived ambushes and storms, had witnessed the pain of his people, yet he had never been confronted by compassion like this. It was disarming, and yet it felt necessary, like a lifeline thrown across a river he thought he must cross alone. Ahioka's eyes glistened as she looked at him. "I do not know all that you have endured," she admitted, "but I know enough to see that your heart is heavy. You are strong, yes, but there is a burden you cannot carry forever without someone noticing, without someone sharing it. I cried for you because I wanted you to know that your pain is seen, that it is not invisible, and that perhaps it can be shared not to weaken you but to lighten your load." Tasunk felt a deep emotion stirring within him, a mixture of relief, sorrow, and awe. No one had ever spoken to him this way. No one had ever offered to understand without judgment. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, the river flowing steadily between them, the sun casting a warm glow over the plains, and realized that he wanted to hear more. Ahioka took a deep breath and began to tell him about her brother. She described Wea's laughter, the way he would run through the fields with an energy that seemed endless, the quiet moments when he would sit by the fire and tell stories of old times. Her voice grew steadier as she spoke, weaving together memories that brought both joy and pain. She did not speak to blame Tasunk. She spoke to honor her brother and to connect with the warrior who had unknowingly been part of their story. Tasunk listened carefully, letting her words flow over him. Each memory she shared, each small detail of her brother's life, brought a strange comfort. He realized that her grief was not only for loss, but also for connection, the connection between lives touched by courage and sacrifice. He had always thought that he needed to suppress emotion to be strong, but Ahioka showed him that acknowledging sorrow did not diminish bravery. In fact, it enhanced it, made it deeper and more human. She paused and looked directly at him, her eyes shining. "I know the battles you have fought are not easy. I know that many have suffered and many have been lost. But I also know that a heart that feels deeply is a heart that can heal, that can guide others, and that can find peace even after pain. I cried because I wanted you to feel that someone sees you, not just the warrior, but the man who stands behind the stories, the one who carries invisible wounds." Tasunk felt a lump in his throat. He had spent so long believing that courage meant facing the world alone, that weakness was only in allowing oneself to feel. Yet here, by this quiet river, listening to a woman who had lost so much, and yet chose empathy over anger, he began to understand something profound. Perhaps strength was not in isolation but in connection. Perhaps bravery included letting oneself be vulnerable, letting one's heart be seen and understood. Ahioka smiled faintly, a soft light breaking through her sadness. "I do not expect you to forgive everything, nor do I ask you to forget. But I hope that knowing someone sees you, knowing that you are not invisible, can ease the weight you carry, even just a little." Tasunk took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill his lungs and the warmth of the fading sun on his skin. He realized that he wanted to trust her, to share not just the story of battles and losses but the private moments that had shaped him, the memories that haunted him, and the dreams he quietly held for a life beyond war. He stepped a little closer, standing on the riverbank, and spoke softly. "You speak with understanding, with a clarity I have not encountered in years. Your words, they reach places I thought were closed forever." Ahioka's gaze softened. "Because they were meant to be reached," she replied. "Sometimes the heart is heavy not because of what we do, but because no one notices what we endure. I notice, Tasunk, and I hope that sharing this with you, even for a moment, can give you a spark of peace." The river flowed steadily, carrying fallen leaves along its path. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers. Tasunk felt a quiet sense of connection he had not known for years. In that moment, he did not feel the need to fight or to prove anything. He simply stood there, absorbing the sincerity of her words, letting them settle in the corners of his heart. For the first time in a long while, he felt that he could breathe freely, that he was not alone in carrying his burdens. Ahioka remained by the river until the stars began to peek through the sky, speaking of her brother, of courage, of sorrow, and of hope. And as she finally rose to leave, she looked at Tasunk one last time. "You are not invisible, and your heart, it matters," she whispered. Tasunk watched her disappear along the path, the sound of the river and the whispers of the wind filling the silence she left behind. His heart, once heavy and closed, had begun to open. He realized that her story, her tears, and her understanding had given him a gift he had never expected. The realization that even a warrior could feel, that even the strongest hearts could find comfort, and that empathy could heal in ways battle never could. The following morning, the plains awoke to the soft sound of birdsong and the gentle rustle of the wind through the tall grasses. Tasunk woke early, as was his habit, and stepped outside his small dwelling. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew and the lingering warmth of the rising sun. He walked slowly to the river, the place where he had met Ahioka the day before. Each step seemed heavier than usual, though not from exhaustion. It was the weight of thought pressing upon him, of memories stirring, and of emotions that had long been buried beneath the duties of a warrior's life. Tasunk reached the riverbank and sat on a flat stone, his gaze fixed on the flowing water. The current moved steadily, unwavering, yet ever-changing, reflecting the sunlight in tiny, glittering waves. He thought of Ahioka's words, the way she had spoken of seeing him, of noticing the pain he had carried in silence, and of honoring the burden he had held alone. He had never known that someone could look at him and not see the warrior first, but the man beneath. Her words echoed in his mind, soft and persistent, like the gentle ripple of the river against the shore. He thought of the battles he had fought, of the men he had lost and the decisions he had made. Every victory had a cost, every choice a shadow. He had spent years believing that he needed to carry all this alone, that showing weakness could be dangerous, that compassion could be mistaken for vulnerability. Yet Ahioka had not judged him. She had only understood. She had shown him that strength could exist alongside sorrow, and that courage included the ability to feel deeply. For the first time in many years, Tasunk allowed himself to remember not just the battles, but the moments before and after them. He remembered his mother, who had taught him the ways of their people, who had spoken of honor and kindness, and who had wept quietly for her children in times of hardship. He remembered his friends, the laughter they had shared around the fire, the whispered stories in the night, and the silent promises they had made to one another. These memories brought a mixture of warmth and pain, yet for the first time, Tasunk did not try to push the feelings away. He let them wash over him, one after the other, like the gentle waves of the river he now watched. Ahioka's words returned to him, a soft reminder of the evening they had spent together by the water. She had spoken of her brother, Wea, with a love and reverence that made Tasunk realize the importance of memory and acknowledgement. He had never thought to speak openly of his own experiences, fearing that no one could understand the weight of his actions. But in her presence, he felt that perhaps it was possible to share, to unburden himself without shame or fear. He closed his eyes and thought of the soldiers who had fallen under his command, the decisions he had made that had saved some lives but lost others. He felt the familiar ache of guilt, the familiar tug of grief, yet it was tempered by a strange sense of release. He did not have to bear it entirely alone. The realization was startling, almost foreign, yet undeniably comforting. He imagined speaking aloud, telling someone of his fears, regrets, and hopes, and he felt a small spark of relief ignite within him. As the sun climbed higher, Tasunk began to reflect on his own heart, something he had rarely done in such deliberate ways. He thought of the ways he had hardened himself, the times he had pushed away compassion, believing it to be a weakness. And he saw now that in trying to be invincible, he had closed himself off from life's full richness, the beauty of connection, the power of empathy, and the quiet strength of understanding. He realized that he had been brave in battle, yes, but perhaps braver still in hiding from himself the very emotions that defined his humanity. He thought of Ahioka again, her eyes glistening with tears not of accusation, but of recognition. She had honored his experiences and invited him to acknowledge them, not as burdens to carry alone, but as parts of life to be understood and shared. That understanding, Tasunk realized, was a form of healing. It was a gentle, quiet power, one that did not demand action but simply the courage to feel, to accept, and to open one's heart. For hours, Tasunk sat by the river, the sun moving across the sky, the wind shifting and carrying with it the soft sounds of the plains. He thought of how many times he had closed himself off, believing solitude was strength, and how many times he had carried sorrow alone, fearing it would weigh others down. And yet, sitting here in the quiet, he felt a new possibility, one where strength and vulnerability could coexist, where courage included the ability to accept comfort and empathy from others. He remembered the first time he had seen Ahioka's tears, the way they reflected the sunlight and carried with them a sincerity that he had never encountered before. He understood now that her tears were not for blame, not for judgment, but for acknowledgement. She had cried for him because she saw him, truly saw him, and in doing so she had offered him the gift of being understood. It was a gift he had not realized he so desperately needed. Tasunk began to think about how this realization could change his life. He could continue to fight and lead, yes, but perhaps he could also allow himself moments of connection, moments of shared emotion without fear. He could honor the lives lost, including his brother-in-arms Weah, by carrying their memory with respect and empathy, rather than only with sorrow and guilt. He could recognize that the strength of the warrior was not diminished by the ability to feel, but enhanced by it. As the day wore on, Tasunk rose from the riverbank and walked slowly back toward the village, his steps lighter than they had been in years. He felt a shift inside him, subtle yet undeniable, a quiet softening of the heart, a willingness to embrace both sorrow and joy, to carry memories with understanding, and to allow himself to be seen. The plains stretched endlessly before him, golden and vast, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that he could walk them not just with the strength of a warrior, but with the openness of a man learning to understand his own heart. That evening, as the sun set and the sky painted itself in shades of pink and orange, Tasunk returned to the river, carrying no weapons, no armor, only himself. He wanted to sit by the water and reflect, to let the peace of the flowing river mirror the peace he hoped to find within. The stars began to appear, small and bright, and he realized that life, like the river, was constantly moving forward, carrying both sorrow and joy along its current. Tasunk understood in that quiet moment that the path of a warrior was not only about battle, victory, or survival. It was also about understanding oneself, embracing the emotions that make us human, and allowing the heart to grow stronger through both grief and connection. He thought again of Ahioka, of the courage it had taken for her to express empathy so openly, and he knew that her presence had begun to change him in ways he could not yet fully name. The night deepened, and the plains grew quiet, yet Tasunk remained by the river, watching the reflection of stars on the water. He felt a calmness he had not known for many years, a gentle sense that his burdens, though heavy, could be shared, even in small ways, and that understanding could be found in places and moments he had never expected. And so, as the wind whispered through the grass and the river carried on its endless journey, Tasunk began to feel the first true stirring of change in his heart, a softening, a recognition, and a quiet hope that perhaps, through empathy and understanding, he could find peace not only for himself, but for those whose lives had touched his. The days that followed were quiet but filled with a new rhythm for Tasunk. The mornings began with the soft glow of sunrise across the plains, the dew sparkling on the tall grass like tiny diamonds, and the wind carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Each day he would walk to the river, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to feel the stillness, the life, and the gentle movement of the water. He remembered Ahioka's words and the way her tears had touched him. He thought often of her courage, the courage it had taken to speak openly of grief, and the understanding she had offered without judgment. At first, Tasunk remained silent, observing the world around him, the movements of the animals, the flight of birds, and the gentle ripple of the river as it moved tirelessly toward the horizon. He found comfort in these quiet moments, realizing that reflection did not weaken him, but strengthened his spirit. The weight of his past, though still present, seemed lighter when he allowed himself to pause, to breathe, and to simply exist without the constant pressure of expectation. One afternoon, as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned shades of pink and gold, Tasunk saw Ahioka approaching the riverbank. She walked with a gentle grace, carrying no burden but herself, yet her presence alone seemed to bring warmth to the space around them. When she saw him, she smiled softly, and for the first time, Tasunk noticed that her smile carried not just kindness, but an understanding that went deeper than words could reach. "Good afternoon, Tasunk," she said, her voice soft yet steady. "I hoped I would find you here." Tasunk nodded, feeling an unexpected relief at her arrival. "I am glad you came," he replied quietly. "I have spent much time thinking, reflecting on what you said. Your words, they remain with me." Ahioka sat on a nearby rock, close enough for conversation, yet far enough to respect his space. "It is not just my words," she said gently. "It is your willingness to listen, to feel, and to accept them. That is what matters, and I see that in you already." They remained quiet for a moment, watching the river flow, the sun's light reflecting like tiny flames on the water. Tasunk felt a stirring in his chest, a mix of nervousness and anticipation. He realized that he wanted to speak, to share some of the weight he had carried alone for so long, yet he was unsure where to begin. Finally, he took a deep breath. "I have lived many years as a warrior, fighting not just for survival but for the people I care about. I believed that strength meant carrying everything alone. Pain, sorrow, regret, all were mine to bear. But you have shown me something different. You have shown me that strength can include openness, that courage can include vulnerability." Ahioka's eyes softened as she listened, her gaze never leaving his. "I am happy to hear you say that," she whispered. "It takes bravery to recognize your own heart, to allow yourself to feel. Many would never take this step." Encouraged by her presence, Tasunk continued. He spoke of battles won and lost, of friends who had fallen and the moments that haunted him still. He shared the private fears he had kept hidden, the quiet regrets that had followed him like shadows. He spoke not to burden Ahioka, but because he felt that, for the first time in his life, someone was willing to understand him without judgment. Ahioka listened with patience, her expression calm and accepting. She did not interrupt or offer advice. She simply allowed him to speak, to unburden himself, and to find solace in being heard. And as he spoke, something remarkable happened. Tasunk felt the tightness in his chest begin to ease, the heaviness in his heart slowly giving way to something lighter, something warmer. As the sun began to set, casting a deep orange glow across the plains, Tasunk paused. He realized that he had not felt this sense of relief or peace in many years. He had been so focused on strength, duty, and survival that he had forgotten the power of connection and the healing it could bring. In Ahioka's presence, he began to see that his courage could coexist with empathy, that bravery could include admitting sorrow and accepting comfort. Ahioka spoke then, her voice soft but certain. Tasunk, the world is full of challenges and pain. But it is also full of moments like this, moments where understanding and connection can change a life. You have begun to take the first steps. You have opened your heart, and that is a triumph greater than any battle. Tasunk nodded slowly. He realized that she was right. He had faced countless dangers, yet this, the act of opening himself fully, of acknowledging his emotions, was perhaps the most courageous thing he had done. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe that he could carry not only the memories of sorrow, but also the possibilities of healing and hope. In the days that followed, Tasunk and Ahioka met regularly by the river. They spoke of life, of loss, and of dreams for the future. Sometimes they sat in silence, simply enjoying the sound of the river and the beauty of the plains. Sometimes they laughed softly, sharing small stories and simple joys that had long been forgotten in Tasunk's life. Each meeting strengthened the bond between them, and each conversation allowed Tasunk to explore the depths of his own heart with less fear and more understanding. Tasunk began to notice changes within himself. His steps were lighter, his sleep deeper, and his heart more open. He began to smile more freely, to speak more honestly, and to allow himself moments of vulnerability without shame. He discovered that compassion and courage were not opposites, but companions, each enhancing the other. And he realized that by accepting empathy from Ahioka, he could also give it in return, offering comfort, respect, and understanding to others in his life. One evening, as the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle overhead, Tasunk spoke of his hopes for the future. "I want to live in a way that honors both the strength I have and the compassion I am learning to embrace. I want to help others not only with my actions but with my heart. And I want to continue this journey, knowing that I am not alone." Ahioka smiled, her eyes reflecting the soft starlight. "That is a noble path, Tasunk. It is not easy, but it is meaningful, and you do not have to walk it alone anymore. You have learned that sharing your heart does not diminish it, it strengthens it." As the night deepened, Tasunk felt a profound sense of peace. He realized that transformation was not sudden, nor was it always dramatic. It was a series of small, intentional steps, moments of reflection, conversation, and understanding that slowly reshaped the heart. Ahioka had been a guide, a witness, and a companion in this journey, helping him to see that healing was possible even for those who had carried sorrow for many years. Tasunk thought about the battles that lay behind him and the life that lay ahead. He understood now that he could not undo the past, nor could he erase the memories of loss and hardship. But he could honor them, learn from them, and allow them to shape him into a person who was not only strong but also deeply compassionate. He could choose to carry the past with wisdom and grace, instead of fear and guilt. The river flowed quietly beside him, a constant reminder of life's persistence and continuity. Just as the water moved forward, carrying leaves, sunlight, and reflection downstream, Tasunk felt himself moving forward, carrying both sorrow and hope. He realized that the warrior he had been and the man he was becoming could exist together. That bravery included the courage to feel, and that connection with others was a source of strength rather than weakness. Ahioka's presence had changed him more profoundly than he had expected. Her empathy, courage, and understanding had opened a path to self-discovery and healing. Tasunk understood that true transformation was not only about internal reflection, but also about the relationships that nurtured growth, the voices that offered understanding, and the willingness to embrace both vulnerability and strength. As the night grew deeper, Tasunk looked at the stars and whispered a quiet promise to himself. He would continue to honor the lessons he had learned, to carry the past with respect, and to embrace the future with openness. He would allow his heart to grow stronger not by closing it off, but by letting it connect, feel, and heal. And in doing so, he would not only honor his own journey but also the lives of those he loved and those who had touched his heart along the way. The plains stretched endlessly beneath the rising sun, soft golden light spilling across the grass and the river that cut like silver through the land. Tasunk woke early, as he had begun to do in recent days, and stepped outside to feel the crisp morning air on his skin. The weight in his chest that had once pressed so heavily upon him now felt lighter, as if the act of reflection and connection had allowed some of it to drift away with the wind. He walked toward the river where he had met Ahioka and where he had begun to understand the true nature of strength and courage. As he approached, he saw her sitting on the same familiar rock, her dark hair catching the sunlight, eyes fixed on the flowing water. When she noticed him, she smiled softly, a gentle warmth radiating from her presence. Tasunk felt a familiar stirring in his chest, not the tightness of worry or sorrow, but a quiet, steady feeling of peace. He had grown used to it now, this sense that life could be both challenging and beautiful, both sorrowful and hopeful at the same time. "Good morning, Tasunk," Ahioka said, her voice calm and comforting. "Good morning," he replied, his tone steady but carrying a hint of wonder. I have been thinking about everything, about what you said, and about what I have felt since we met. I am beginning to understand more than I ever thought I could." Ahioka's eyes softened. "And what have you understood?" she asked gently. Tasunk looked out over the river, watching the sunlight dance across the surface of the water. "I have understood that true strength is not only in the battles we fight or the victories we win," he said slowly, "but also in our ability to feel, to reflect, and to accept connection. I have learned that courage can exist alongside vulnerability, and that opening one's heart does not make a person weaker, it makes them human." Ahioka nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "That is a great understanding, Tasunk. It is not easy to come to, and it takes time and reflection to truly feel it in your heart." Tasunk took a deep breath and thought of all the days he had spent wandering the plains, of the battles he had faced, of the losses he had endured. He thought of his friends who had fallen, the families who had suffered, and the moments when he had felt alone in his grief. Yet now, sitting by the river with Ahioka, he realized that he had begun to carry all of it differently, not with despair, but with acceptance and understanding. He understood that life's pain was not something to be hidden or avoided, but something to be honored and acknowledged with empathy and grace. "I see now," he said softly, "that my past does not define me in its entirety. I can carry it, yes, but I can also learn from it and allow it to guide me toward understanding, rather than sorrow. I can honor the lives lost, including those of friends, family, and even strangers, by living fully and compassionately, rather than by burying myself in guilt." Ahioka's eyes shone with quiet pride. "You are learning, Tasunk, and by learning, you are changing. That is the path to peace, not forgetting the past, but carrying it with wisdom and kindness, letting it shape you into a person who can face the world with an open heart." The river flowed endlessly beside them, a constant reminder that life moved forward no matter what. Tasunk realized that he could also move forward, not by forgetting, but by embracing the lessons that each experience had taught him. He began to see the future not as a series of battles to be won or sorrows to endure, but as an opportunity to live fully, with awareness, empathy, and strength that came from understanding, rather than fear. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warm light across the plains, Tasunk began to speak of his hopes. "I want to carry my heart openly," he said, "to let people know that strength is not in hiding sorrow, but in facing it and sharing it. I want to help those around me, not only with my actions but with my heart. And I want to continue walking this path, knowing that I am not alone, that connection and empathy are part of true courage." Ahioka smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunlight and the river's sparkle. "And you will, Tasunk. You have begun to carry yourself with wisdom and compassion. The change within you is clear, and it will only grow stronger as you continue to live with openness and understanding." For the first time in years, Tasunk felt a deep sense of calm. The battles he had fought, the friends he had lost, the weight of responsibility, all of it was still part of him, but it no longer crushed him. Instead, it became part of a larger understanding, a tapestry of life in which sorrow, strength, courage, and empathy existed together. He realized that true peace came not from escaping hardship, but from facing it with an open heart, and from accepting both pain and joy as part of the human experience. Over the following weeks, Tasunk and Ahioka continued to meet by the river. They spoke of life, of hope, and of dreams for the future. Sometimes they laughed softly, sharing stories of small joys and moments of happiness that Tasunk had long forgotten. Sometimes they sat in silence, listening to the river and the wind, finding comfort in simply being present with one another. With each meeting, Tasunk felt his heart grow lighter, his spirit stronger, and his understanding of life deeper. He also began to notice changes in himself that went beyond the riverbank. In the village, he treated others with gentleness and patience, listening carefully to those who sought his counsel. He helped those in need, not just through physical strength but through kindness and understanding. People began to notice the difference, seeing a warrior who was still strong, yet tempered with compassion and wisdom. And Tasunk himself realized that this balance, the combination of strength and empathy, was the truest form of courage he had ever known. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in deep shades of red and purple, Tasunk and Ahioka walked along the riverbank together. The wind carried the scent of flowers and the distant sound of birds settling for the night. Tasunk felt a sense of gratitude deep in his heart, a recognition of the journey he had taken and the guidance she had offered. "You have changed my life, Ahioka," he said quietly. "Not just by showing me empathy, but by helping me see myself clearly, by allowing me to feel, and by teaching me that courage can take many forms. Your presence has made me stronger, and I will carry what I have learned for the rest of my life." Ahioka smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "And you have changed your own life, Tasunk. I only offered understanding, but it is your willingness to open your heart that has made all the difference. Your courage, your willingness to see and feel, has brought this change. You have embraced what many cannot, and that is remarkable." Tasunk felt a warmth in his chest that he had never experienced before, a sense of completeness, of connection, and of hope. He realized that his journey was not only about past battles or losses, but about living fully, understanding deeply, and embracing the power of empathy and love. He knew that life would continue to challenge him, that sorrow and struggle would appear again. But he also knew that he now possessed a heart capable of facing those challenges with wisdom, compassion, and courage. As night fell over the plains and stars shimmered above, Tasunk sat by the river, reflecting on the journey he had taken. He had faced the depths of sorrow and guilt, explored the corners of his heart he had long ignored, and emerged with a new understanding of strength and courage. He understood that life was not measured solely by victories or battles, but by the depth of connection, the willingness to feel, and the courage to embrace both joy and sorrow. And so, with the river flowing endlessly beside him, Tasunk made a quiet promise to himself: to live with an open heart, to honor the past with wisdom, to embrace the future with hope, and to carry both strength and compassion as his guiding principles. He knew that he had been forever changed by a single moment, a single tear shed by someone who saw him for who he truly was, and that change would guide his life from that day forward. The warrior who had once believed that strength meant solitude now understood that true courage included connection, empathy, and understanding. He had learned that tears could heal, that sorrow could teach, and that love and kindness could be as powerful as any weapon. And with that knowledge, Tasunk's heart was finally at peace, carrying both the lessons of the past and the hope of the future, forever changed by the presence of one who had shown him the power of seeing, understanding, and feeling.